Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the NTC podcast. Aaron Washington here, joined by Colin. We are two members of the NTC team. We have a lot to cover today. Obviously, there were a lot of deals that went down during the trade deadline this past week, but we do want to cover the big ticket items. So, Katie moved to a new team in case you've been living under a rock. That happened just a few days ago. So, there are a lot of deals here that went down. We'd like to cover. We're going to cover a little bit of the on-court ramifications of these deals. We're also going to cover what it means for these teams' financial situations, their cap sheets, their draft capital. We're going to see where it leaves every team post-trade and how it might affect their overall performance going into the playoff stretch. Because, Colin, believe it or not, man, I mean, we're just, we're past the trade deadline. The All-Star game is this week on Sunday, and we're not too far away from the playoff stretch run. So crazy to think about we're getting down to the nitty-gritty of the season here in the near future.
I know. I can't believe that we're already past. It seems like we were just talking about the first couple weeks opening up of the season. We're already here past this crazy trade deadline. So it's awesome. It's going to be a super interesting push to the playoffs.
I mean, it really is. And we're going to cover why these deals are going to be so impactful in that way specifically. So let's jump right into it, man. I don't want to leave the people hanging, leave the people wanting. If they're listening, if they're watching the very beginning of this podcast, they're probably in it for one or two big deals. And this is the first one that went down the other day that I think kind of shook people. Number one, because of the time of the day that it happened. I think it was like 1 a.m. when it went down. I was literally probably 5 minutes away from going to sleep. And I checked my phone and I get the notification from Shams that it went down. And I was like, am I dreaming? Am I asleep? Like, am I messing this? But believe it or not, it was real life. And Kevin Durant is on the move again, which is crazy to think about it because he's in the first year of a 4-year extension. I don't know if people are thinking about that, but he's owed $44 million this season. And this was initially signed with the Nets just last fall, I believe. And he's signed on for 4 years, and now he's gone. So I think what that tells us here, Colin, is that a lot of these deals that players are signing, I mean, no one is safe anymore. No one is safe. No one is assured to be with the team for even a year or two into their new deals. It's just kind of crazy to see the power these players have these days and what it means for all these teams trying to make moves. Like nothing is set in stone anymore. It's wild.
Right. Yeah, and it's wild. We were just talking about this a couple podcasts ago when we were talking about the new CBA negotiations, and if they can do anything to restrict these demands on trades or punish the players in some way, shape, or form. Because, like you said, and we don't really even know what happened behind the scenes this time, right? It wasn't like it was reported that he demanded the trade and then the trade was made this time. It kind of happened behind the scenes, and then all of a sudden it was made. It was, of course, insinuated that he wanted the deal. He still wanted to trade, and now that Kyrie was dealt, it seemed like it was he certainly wanted it to happen. But yeah, I can't believe that these things can happen after they sign these massive deals. It just doesn't matter how big of a contract it can be. They can still demand the trade, and they can still get what they want. And he went to where he essentially wanted it, seemed too.
Yeah. I think the timing really worked out for him because the Suns were in a situation where I think their confidence was wavering a little bit, not necessarily the players, but the front office in terms of can this team really compete for a championship? Chris Paul is in year 18, believe it or not. He was in the 2005 draft. Devin Booker is still working his way back from a pretty severe groin/hamstring injury. Yeah. So this team was kind of floundering there for a long time during the season, and they're just getting back to full health. And they saw a window of opportunity that I think wasn't necessarily there from their perspective back in the summertime because everybody's at a clean slate. Everybody's at zero. You haven't gone through the season yet. Everybody's hopes are high. When you get halfway through the season or more and you've dropped to the play-in or just above the play-in slots in the Western Conference, things change a little bit. So I think they saw the how fragile their team construction was, and that's why they were, I think, more willing to do a deal now with Brooklyn. But specifically, the parameters of this deal included Kevin Durant and TJ Warren to the Suns. And then here in a minute, we can cover the Nets, what the Nets received. But what I'm going to do here, Colin, and for everybody watching, is share my screen here just so you guys can see the Phoenix Suns situation, first of all. So here on the screen, I have the Phoenix Suns cap sheet, and we can look at just how much Kevin Durant is owed, not just for this year, but for the next 3 years. And I believe that takes them to age 37, I believe, when this deal is done or it's closing out in the end, at $54 million. And our guy Ali Shafiq that does our graphics made a hugely important graphic for this deal. You can find it on our Instagram page. But it looks like Phoenix's tax bill increased by $35 million in light of this deal. So increased from 33 million to 68. They have 44 million incoming because of this deal. TJ Warren is an important inclusion we can't ignore. If you look here on the cap sheet, I mean, he's only owed $1.8 million this season, pretty much a minimum deal, a vet minimum. So as far as what TJ Warren can mean to this team, how do you see him fitting in here? Do you see him as a starter next to KD and Book to kind of assume the role that Cam Johnson had for this team? Or do you see him as more of like a off-the-bench spark plug type of guy that can go out there and get buckets when Book or KD or someone like that is off the court?
I would see him more as a bench player that's going to come in and provide that spark for them. And just going back too, as far as the luxury tax, that's how much they're over the tax, and then that's going to be multiplied on the tax bill too. So when we're talking about the timing of how this happened, it's kind of the perfect storm of why this was able to happen. We were talking about the when Durant first demanded the trade, it didn't work then. They have a whole new owner. They have a whole ownership group that came in now. Matt Ishbia came in and he made this deal happen, which was able to, push the deal through, let them go over the luxury tax. Sarver wasn't going to do that. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say about that before we jumped into the on the court. But yeah, I think TJ Warren, I mean, I think he's going to be huge to come off the bench, because that's what they're going to need is a little bit more depth from the bench side of things with such a strong starting rotation. I think that he would be huge coming off the bench for them. What do you think the role will be for him?
That's actually where I was. I had similar
Yeah.
thoughts. I was just looking at their roster before we came on. Honestly, I think the best plan for them as far as their starting lineup would be to start Chris, start Book, start KD, start Ayton, of course, and then maybe someone like Torrey Craig can come in and be that other forward. Torrey Craig has had a strong season for them. Maybe even a Kogi as a small ball four. Both of those guys bring a lot of toughness.
Yeah.
They bring some defensive versatility, some rebounding, some sporadic spurts of scoring. But when you play with CP3, Book, Ayton, and KD, they don't need to be scorers. They just need to go do little things. And that's what they specialize in. So I'm in total agreement. Bring Warren off the bench. Have him man the second unit with Payne, with either Craig or Kogi, Baisley, and then Bismack Biyombo. And you got yourself a solid 10-man rotation. Throw in Jock Landale for stretches, 11, maybe with Damian Lee. You're looking good. So that's where I'm at.
I think their bigger issue is when you say the 10-man rotation is how they're going to be able to manage Chris Paul's minutes. And they're not a one seed with load management. They're still fighting for a spot. So and they'll be fine. They're favorites in the West now to win it, right? But they still have to deal with load management. KD's injured. Paul's obviously is up there in age. They have to deal with that too. So they can't have a ton of minutes for these guys. So some of these guys are going to have to step up when these guys obviously are out, as they are now. And as you're trying to limit their minutes, hopefully these guys can step up so they don't have to push these guys too far in the regular season and in the playoffs.
No, exactly. And an important note about Chris Paul's deal, now you mention him, if they can successfully manage his minutes, get to the finish line without him breaking down, which it seems like he's had a lot of trouble the past couple of years staying healthy, which is normal because he's getting up there in his 30s. But if you look at the next 2 years, 30 million, 60 million over the next 2 years, but these numbers are in red, which means they're non-guaranteed. Right. So I wonder how the rest of this season will impact his future with this team. If he really just breaks down, if he's not the same Chris Paul, if he can't carry them in the playoffs for short stretches, if he just really loses his effectiveness, I just wonder what that means for these next 2 years, because even if they were to completely move off of him, maybe even Cameron Payne, I doubt they have a lot of space because as it stands, where they're at with all these numbers, I mean, not a lot of space at all, no cap space. They're already over the tax for next year. So I mean, it's a tough situation. They have a
It is.
few restricted free agents, so definitely a lot to think about for their future. But yeah, as far as this season, they're going to need to figure that out because Chris Paul, he's not that 35 minutes a game guy that he was before. You're going to need to manage that for sure if you want to make it through the marathon that is the NBA season.
Yeah, yeah, and it, I feel like at this point, depending on how it goes, you almost have to exercise that contract because you're going to lose that slot otherwise if you don't. So it's almost where I mean, look, the owner is going to have to pay the bill, but if you don't pay him, there, you got to look at the numbers. I don't know off the top of my head, but essentially they're still going to be over the cap, right? So you're going to lose that salary slot. So it's almost worth bringing him back anyway and taking that gamble regardless. So you just hope that he can, you know, stay healthy and finish strong here, and then they can feel good about him, coming back next year. The other part
No,
that will be
definitely.
interesting is how they all get along with Aiton now too, right? We still don't know what's going on with him. He hasn't performed like they thought he would. It seems like he still doesn't get along with the head coach, and I don't know if they're going to want to trade him in the offseason too. And a lot of people brought that up as part of the trade. It was huge that they didn't have to include him in the trade. But what people forget is that he had an offer sheet as a restricted free agent this offseason. And what that meant was he has veto power in a trade. So if Brooklyn came to them and said, we want Ayton, and they said, talk to him, he doesn't want to go, that's it. There's no other option. They can't do anything. Their hands are tied. So that very well might have happened too. He doesn't want to go to Brooklyn. He might want to go somewhere else.
No, exactly. And um, Aiden's definitely an important part of this as well because, him being in his fifth year, he's in the beginning stretch of his new rookie extension. His future is going to be interesting to watch as well because we know what happened this past summer. The good thing is for this season, it seems like he's playing better. He's had a strong stretch of, I want to say 10 or 12 games where it seems like he's been assertive. He's been getting on the board. He's been really doing what this team expected from him. And looks like he, at least for this season, he's locked in and ready for that playoff stretch. So, I mean, that's going to bode well, extremely well for the rest of the season and going into the playoffs. So, of course, there's another part of this deal, Colin. I mean, it wasn't just the Suns. The Nets had a lot to do with this deal as well. We can shift over here to the Brooklyn Nets cap sheet to look at their situation. So, they actually went the opposite direction as far as their financial commitment. So, they saved about $70 million in luxury tax payments after these two trades
That's
because it wasn't
crazy.
just KD, it was also Kyrie not too long ago that moved on. So they saved a lot of money in these two deals. So, I mean, they have a lot of solid players here. So you look at these 10, 12 guys in this rotation, these are some really solid players, man. I mean, Ben Simmons, I mean, he's had his struggles, but I mean, he's still a valuable player. Bridges, Dinwiddie, Harris. I mean, you go down the line, really solid guys all around. I like the rotation
Yeah.
they've built out. The games are fun to watch. They compete on defense. They're not really going to be able to get over the hump when it comes to these elite teams in the league, but they're not bad enough to fall out of the top 6 or 7 in the conference, in my opinion. So you look down the line, Cam Thomas, Cam Johnson, a lot of solid deals here. There's a lot they can do. They also created two traded player exceptions of 7.9 million and 1.8 million in these couple of deals here. So they have a lot of depth, and they actually also brought in another player, Jay Crowder, but they flipped him to Milwaukee after they got him. And correct me if I'm wrong, Colin, but are they one of those teams that got 5 second round picks
Yes. Yes,
out of
they
that
are.
move? Oh
Which is
man,
just, can you imagine the negotiation of like,
oh
I
man,
want 7 seconds. No, you're getting 3. And then they whittle it down and they get five
let's meet in the
second
middle
moves.
at 5. That'll work.
Yeah. What a straight. I would love to
Uh,
be fly on the wall for those negotiations where it lands on 5 second round picks. And the fact
oh my
that I know we'll talk about it a little bit more, but the fact that will happen, that happened more than once, and I think we were talking about it before the podcast. I think there are 44 second round picks or conditional seconds or swaps moved at this trade deadline this year.
Yeah,
That's wild stuff.
unbelievable, man.
But yeah, I
Unbelievable.
mean, I love what they did. I mean, they got really as much as I think that you possibly can, other than landing another star player for a star player, which just isn't going to happen when you're trading KD and everyone knows that he wants out, right? They landed a lot of really solid players with real reasonable contracts on top of all of those first round picks. And I think it was really smart. I know they were looking at other deals. Obviously, they flipped Jay Crowder, and I think they were looking at to do other moves as well. Didn't seem like they found what they wanted. I think it's better to take this roster, assess it for the rest of the season, see what they have, and then go into the offseason, and they can do a million different things now, right? I mean, you look at these contracts, look at this cap sheet, and every single contract except for that wonderful Ben Simmons one is extremely reasonable. And, every single one is tradable. Every single one is something that you would want to keep on your roster, right? So there are so many different things that they can do. They can sit and wait, or they can make moves. They can use those reasonable salaries and the draft picks to bring in another star. There's a lot of different options for them for the future.
An incredible amount of options. And like you said, I mean, these are contracts that, except for Ben Simmons, any team would love to have on the roster because they
Yeah.
just, a lot of these guys can fit anywhere, like Claxton, Royce, Joe, Mikal Bridges, Dorian. I mean, you can plug them in anywhere. They can
Yeah.
start, they can come off the bench. That's the beauty of it.
Right.
So I'm really interested to see what they end up doing after this because they have a really good team, but everybody knows this isn't an elite team anymore. You lost that star power
Right.
that could carry you into the playoffs and beyond. So do you pivot towards more of a revamp? Do you trade these pieces for another star? I'm not sure where they go from here, but I mean, they could do so many different things, as you said. And yeah, I just love how, and this is a common theme. I think we discussed this on a prior podcast, but those mid-tier contracts between, I would say, 8 million and 15 to 20 million, super reasonable, super movable. And those are the type of contracts that you kind of mold into a deal for a guy like KD. And going back to those picks here for a second, I mean, Brooklyn did a good job of replenishing their first round pick collection because after that James Harden trade, they were really lacking. You see here 24, they don't have any picks. 26, they don't have any picks. This is a swap in 27 and 25 and also 23. So these firsts they got from Phoenix were very important. And a pick swap in 28 as well. And then, of course, they got those seconds from Dallas in the Kyrie Irving deal. So it really helps them out in terms of what they had to work with over the next few years. Because before this deal, I mean, their future was really iffy. It didn't really make sense for them to tank because they didn't have any kind of draft incentive. But now that comes back for them. And, okay, this first probably isn't very valuable. We know that. Phoenix is pretty freaking good. But you go out to 25, 27, those could be very valuable.
Yeah, that's the thing. You don't know how long, Durant's going to end up playing for, right? And they have those first. And going back to how, solid of a roster they have, they don't have an elite roster. They have a solid roster. And with all reasonable contracts except Ben Simmons. And on top of that, when you look at it, the only ones who are I keep separating the Ben Simmons contract because they didn't bring him in on these deals, but the only ones that passed the 23-24 season is Mikal Bridges and Dorian Finney-Smith. And both of those are very reasonable contracts. Everyone else is up next year. Everyone. Exactly. So they have an extreme amount of flexibility. And I mean after next year, after the 23-24 season. So after that season, they're going to have all of these picks and, all the Phoenix picks and a lot of cap room flexibility if they want to use it.
For sure. And we didn't really get into all the picks the Knicks got because actually here they got more picks that we just need to reflect on the draft capital sheet here. But so they got those 3 first rounders from Phoenix. They also got a second rounder from Milwaukee in 28. And then they got a second round pick from Milwaukee in 29. So seconds, a lot of
No, they
seconds, a
got
lot of
5
first.
seconds, right? They got 5
Yeah.
for the Jay
Yep.
Crowder deal. So
Right. So a whole lot of
not
seconds
all
here.
from Milwaukee, but
Right.
they came from that trade through Milwaukee. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, just a whole lot of picks just flying all around. So
Right.
definitely nice for the Nets. Replenish that
It gives
their
them
situation
hope
a
at
little bit.
least. It gives them hope. You know,
Yeah.
they went from having elite talent, which look, in the end, they played 16 games together and they won one series or 2 series together. So it didn't get them that far anyway. So they're revamping and they have hope now. So and it was players who didn't want to be there in the end. So
Yeah. So I mean, everybody wins. Everybody
yeah.
got what they wanted.
Right.
So don't want to neglect the fact that the Pacers were a part of this deal. It was a 3-team deal. So the Pacers got George Hill, Serge Ibaka, Jordan Nwora, 3 second rounders from Milwaukee, and cash considerations from Brooklyn. So they got a little bit out of this deal as well. I mean, those players aren't really going to do much for the Pacers, I don't think. But again, 3 future second round picks. So that's the theme of this trade deadline: second rounders. I mean, it just seems like the value of seconds has just really dropped, because if we're seeing for a guy like Jay Crowder, like we're talking about 5 seconds for Jay Crowder. I mean, he's not even, I wouldn't even say he's an elite starter level guy at this point. He's more of like he's a decent utility player, come in and just be a solid 3-and-D guy. Like that warrants multiple seconds now. Like that kind of raises my eyebrow a little bit on what these guys could command in trades. Maybe it was because the Suns were just in a spot where they almost had to trade him. So these teams were able to get more seconds back from them. Maybe it was something like that, but it's just curious to see how all these seconds start flying around for guys that with all due respect, aren't the most talented guys in the league.
Well, I think it's a combination of a couple things. One is, a lot of these teams, because first round picks are getting thrown around so much, there's not a lot of first round capital to go around. Even back end first round capital, right? So when you might give up one back end first round pick for a good rotation player, like you would, a couple of years ago, those just aren't even available. So what's the alternative? I mean, you still want to give the guy up. You don't want to let him walk. So what are you going to do there now? And then the question is, well, what is the equal value in the second round? And, I don't know when you want to get into it. I did a little bit of research as far as how often these second round picks have hit in the past few years. And it seems like if you can get the upper tier of the second round, you at least have a chance. And I think that's why it's collect as many as possible and see if any of those are going to end up landing at the higher end of the second round, and give you a better chance of landing someone who is got, the chances of him being an all-star, very, 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 very low, but a rotation player, that's valuable. And you can get them on the cheap. So I think that's why we're seeing these second round picks thrown around so much more.
So you mentioned the rate at which these picks are hitting.
Yeah.
I think that's something we'd all love to know. I mean, we're already on the topic. I mean, what are we looking at as far as the success rate from second rounders that are drafted over the past few years?
All right. So I started diving into this because I saw all of these second round picks getting thrown around. And I said, all right, how can we determine some type of value or success rate for second round picks? So I only did it for 2017 to 2020. And the reason of that is because 2017 is when two-way contracts first started. And so there was a lot more options for players to be able to start entering the NBA through the G League, right? So that's why that was my logic for there. And I stopped at 2020 because 2022, they're not going to be in the league yet, right? Most likely. So in 2021. So I wanted to give a little bit of a buffer. All right. So I compared it through the non-lottery first round picks, right? So it's picked 15 to 30. I compared it to. And what I did was I filtered it by the players who played average minute. Now it's over their career so far, their career minutes per game, 18 minutes plus. right? So you're thinking around a rotation player and better. And for your first round pick, you're going to look at you're hitting for a non-lottery first round pick during that time frame. You're hitting at 54%, a 54% clip. All right. Second round picks all together, you're hitting at only a 21% clip. So it's less than half than the back half of the first round. But what is really interesting about this is then I broke it into 31 to 40, picks 31 to 40, picks 41 to 50, and picks 51 to 60. And picks 31 to 40, it was still only 22.5%. And then the picks 41 to 50, it jumped up 30%. Now it's because it's such a small sample size that if you get one player who is playing really well, and starts for a team, he's jumping that statistic really high. But the 51 to 60, it drops down to 10%. And that's why I think it's really important when these teams are trading these second round picks, you at least want them towards the front end of the second round. People hear first round versus second round. Well, if it's the 29th pick or the 32nd pick, I might still be getting the same player. You know what I mean? So that's where the value comes in. So the value almost cuts completely in half as far as your chances of gaining at least a rotational player. But I just thought it was interesting to look into that. They're kind of obvious stats. There's nothing shocking about that. But it's interesting to see at least how far off we are from the back end of the first round heading into the second round, what we're looking at.
Colin, I think these team staffs got a hold of that data, and that's why they started throwing picks around.
Yeah.
They saw that the offensive hitting, and they're like, you know what, just let it go. We don't even care.
But what I think I hear too though is give me more of them, right? And if I land, if I have 4 picks from 31 to 45, rather than 1 pick at 28, maybe I'll have a better chance of hitting a player that's going to play for my team. I still have a less chance of hitting an all-star player or a true, a number 1 or number 2, but I might have a better chance of hitting my next rotation guy. And then you got to start thinking about the contract, right? So on your rookie scale in the first round, you're guaranteed 2 years.
Right.
And in the second round, you're not guaranteed anything. So there's some freedom and flexibility as far as the contract.
100%. I mean, while we're on the subject of second rounders, I mean, that was nowhere near all the second rounders that worked their way around the league. We had another deal go down over the trade deadline that was pretty shocking as well. Not quite the KD blockbuster, but still pretty notable nonetheless. So Westbrook moved on in this deal. So he is now, or he was rather, a member of the Utah Jazz. He's since been bought out, and he is what it sounds like is struggling to find a suitor in the buyout market, which is interesting. Maybe we can get into that a little bit here later. But the Lakers received Russell, Beasley, and Vanderbilt, which I have to say, bravo to the Lakers for turning Westbrook and one of their first rounders, not both, but one, into Russell, very strong point guard, maybe borderline all-star level point guard. Malik Beasley, one of the best sharpshooters in the league over the past couple of years. And then Jared Vanderbilt, one of those just like prime, whatever you need, coach, I'm there. Yeah. I'm going to do the dirty work. I'm going to bang with forwards and centers. I'm going to go get boards. I'm going to do whatever's asked of me. So, I mean, those are the guys that the Lakers needed. So, without going too deep into it, I just feel like the Lakers got a massive win out of this deal. They didn't just get pieces. I mean, they got legitimate players that they could actually see as a part of their rotation, part of their roster for not just this season, but going forward. It's been reported that they want to retain D'Angelo Russell and see if they can give him a new contract. So, I mean, of course, the other teams got picks and stuff, but I mean, in the immediate future, I don't think there's any doubt that the Lakers got the best part of this deal. I think they should be applauded for that. I mean, fantastic work.
Yeah, they definitely did something that I didn't think that they would be able to do, and turned. First of all, I thought that they would have to give up both of those picks. And when we say both of those picks, essentially what we mean is they have more than 2 picks, but under the CBA, essentially, without getting into the weeds, they can only trade 2 more first round picks. So essentially they have the 27 and 29 picks to trade. So they only had to trade one of those, and they got some legitimate players to play with these guys. The only downside, and when you pull back from this, and I know they have to do this because they have LeBron and AD, but when you pull back a little bit from this, is that and you're really just fixing a mistake that was made before with Russell Westbrook. But essentially, you had to trade a first round pick to get rid of an expiring contract, and that's never good. But the good thing is, within that, they got D'Angelo Russell, and if they're able to hold on to him after this year, I think that's a huge win.
I mean, a massive win. I mean, I was
Yeah.
of the thought that they should find a way to move at least one of those picks. Because, I mean, LeBron is playing amazing basketball, but, I mean, he still is 38 years old. I mean, he's not going to be
Yeah.
playing like this forever, as much as it may seem like it sometimes. And AD, he's 9 years younger than LeBron. But it doesn't seem like it sometimes because he's hurt just as much, if not more, than LeBron is.
I know.
So you have to kind of just take advantage of what you got. I know the future is going to be bleak for Lakers fans and the franchise, but if they already have a championship, which, these guys have done what they were brought here to do, capitalize on that further by using picks to bring in rotation guys, starter players, which is what they did. It's not like they gave up both. It's not like they are out of picks. They still do have a little bit of their draft capital left. But I just think that looking at this roster here, I mean, Lonnie Walker was already a good pickup for them. Hachimura, they executed that trade a couple weeks ago. Mo Bamba was a kind of under the radar deal here, which he's not guaranteed for next season. So, I mean, that's a plus. Downside is you have to find a new deal for D'Angelo. That might not be the most fun set of negotiations to be in. But, I mean, you go down the line. I mean, like, you go all the way down. I mean, you have solid players all the way down. I mean, Troy Brown hasn't been bad. Schroeder at that minimum, he's vastly outperformed that deal, I think. Reeves, same
The only
thing.
real question here is it enough to get them to title contender? And
That's the
gonna
question.
be the
I
real
personally don't think so, but I mean,
Right.
it definitely gives them. I think it gives them an outside shot, which is more of what you could say before for that team.
Yeah, right.
So I mean, that's definitely a win for them. So they got those 3 players in the deal, and then you look at the Timberwolves situation, and they got Mike Conley, Alexander Walker, and then a second round swap via the Lakers, 25 pick from the Jazz, and a 26 second from the Jazz. More of those seconds. So I mean, they got 2 seconds. That was better than nothing. So for the Timberwolves, I mean, I like the Conley pickup. I like what it means for their team as far as having another floor general that kind of meshes well with Towns and Edwards as 2 of their high usage players. I'm not sure what it means for the next couple of years because Conley is aging and he's not going to be a starting level player for long. But I think it's a better fit than D'Angelo. D'Angelo just wasn't the move. He wasn't meshing. It was a your turn, my turn. And I think things are going to flow a little bit smoother here with Conley in the mix. But if you look at the Timberwolves situation, I mean, it's a little bit bleak. I'm not going to lie. If this current iteration of the team doesn't work out, because you see, which let me see if I can swap screens here. Because I think I was on the other screen.
And while you're doing that, what I would say is, look, if you didn't think you were going to sign D'Angelo after this year, trade him for something. I mean, don't let him walk where you're standing right now, because you're certainly not contenders, especially with how much stronger the West got with all these trades. So why not trade him? I think you may have improved your roster with Mike Conley just from a chemistry standpoint, and you're getting some draft capital back, which you lost a lot of in the offseason, bringing in Rudy Gobert. So I think if you had no intention of signing him back, re-signing him, or he didn't want to come back, then it was the move to make. And if it was the best deal out there, which I assume it was, then great.
Yeah. So I mean, it's an interesting situation for the Timberwolves. I mean, the pressure is on because you look at this draft capital situation. No first and 23, no first and 25. No picks whatsoever in 27. And then in 29, you have a protected pick. So, I mean, if it's in the top 5, they retain it. But if it's outside of that, they lose that pick. And it's also tied to their second to 29. So, I mean, for the Wolves, you got to hit. You got to hit on at least a deep playoff run, because if not, the future is murky. They don't have a lot of firsts. This 26 is a least favorable situation between them and Utah. So, I mean, they don't outright own that pick. Their second rounder here is another least favorable situation between 3 teams. So that's probably going to be a late second, I would imagine, at least a mid-round, halfway through the second type of pick. Okay, you got the 2 seconds from Utah, but I mean, it's still a dicey situation. So I think it just illustrates how much of a big deal the next 2 to 3 years are for the Timberwolves, and how little they have to fall back on if things do go sideways.
Yeah.
For them. So just wanted to highlight that real quick. And then if we go to Utah's situation, take a look at what they have to work with. A little bit better. I mean, you do have, we got that first rounder from the Lakers. So you see that here. It is protected. So they get if it's 5 through 30. And then I believe if they do not, then it's connected to their second rounder. So it actually could end up being the second, which wouldn't be the worst thing ever. And then they do have more firsts here. They have their own first in 23, 7, 9, protected in 4 and 5, and also 6. And then, of course, the Minnesota first. So Utah's looking good. I love Utah's situation. I mean, Westbrook is gone. The young guys can flourish. A lot of great role players, rotation players. They have an all-star. They might make the playoffs. They have a lot of draft capital. And as I'm about to illustrate, also their cap sheet's looking pretty good. So, I mean, as far as the Jazz's future, I think it's as bright as anybody's, because they moved off of older point guard and Conley. Sexton is definitely stepped up recently. I mean, down the roster, definitely some solid production here. So I'm a fan. I'm a fan of what they have going on as far as Utah's future.
Yeah, you have to like what they're doing. I mean, you thought that they were tanking this year, and maybe they were, and then they surprised themselves that they're a little bit better than one of the worst teams in the West. But I think they're in a similar spot, it seems, with a lot more draft capital, like the Nets. Like, they have all these great role players. Or good, not even role players, but good starters, no elite talent, with very reasonable contracts. And they're going to have a lot of different options moving forward. Now, they have a ton of picks too, right? So they're going to be able to do a lot of different things. They can move a lot of these players, or they can hold on to them or re-sign them and start drafting away, and build it that way. So they, again, that's what you want when you don't have elite talent. You want as many options as possible with all reasonable contracts that aren't tying you down. Obviously, see that Russell Westbrook one. That's not going to last long. And then everything else is under the most expensive contract is $16.5 million. I mean,
right.
that's unbelievable. So they're managing their cap sheet quite well, knowing that they're in a rebuild. They have plenty of picks to go, and they have a lot of good players on their team. They're not just a horrible team either. So,
if you're watching this podcast, you'll see a name that I just highlighted, Walker Kessler, who was the 22nd pick for the Timberwolves before being traded in the Gobert deal. Under team control for the next 3 years, and he recently had an insane stat line. Not too long ago. I mean, this is a guy that, and it goes back to the point, Colin, we were just talking about with all these picks. That's not a lottery pick. That's towards the latter half of the first round. And it just goes to show you, the odds are lower that you get a real superstar. Like, he's probably not going to be a superstar. High-level starter for a long time, already an elite rim protector, and these are the kind of picks that you can end up making if you're the Jazz and you just manage your draft capital well. I mean, you don't have to
Right.
have a top 5 pick. So with all their draft capital, I mean, if they just utilize these picks well, 2 first this year, um, another 3 first in 25, 2 first in 26. I mean, just so many shots at this, potentially 4 first in 27. I mean, like this is pretty nice. It's a pretty
Yeah.
nice place to be for Utah. So the way they're drafting, I like their odds of getting another impact player with these firsts they have going forward. So definitely a good sign for them.
Absolutely.
So it looks like 2 more big trades we want to highlight here this evening. The first of which being the Pirtle trade to Toronto. So just recently, Jakob Pirtle returns to the team that drafted him, the Toronto Raptors, and I watched them play last night, and they were pretty freaking solid. I mean, they played the Magic, 2 very talented, lengthy teams, a lot of athleticism. And Pirtle stood out in a big way. Like this man was, I mean, he had amazing chemistry with Van Vliet on the pick and roll. Got a lot of easy looks. I think as far as shoring up at center position, I think it's been like burning a hole in that roster for like 2 years now. Can't really do much better. Can't really do much better. So you bring him in. I was a little surprised at the deal because it looked like the team had kind of plateaued. Like you look at this core here for Toronto, these guys have been here for multiple years, like 2 to 3 to 4 years. You go down the line, you're like, okay, maybe this team has tapped out its potential. Maybe it's time for something new. No, we're going to go get a starting level center that's on expiring contract to go into our front court. Were you surprised at that deal as well, just considering their position here?
Yeah, I had it in my notes as most surprising trade of the deadline, and especially everything that you're talking about as far as how their season is going, and then at the deadline, all the rumors were about OG and basically how everyone but Scotty Barnes was on the block for them, and it looks like they were asking the world for OG, but that's why it's so funny that it seemed like they were the team that seemed to be sellers in for this trade deadline, and then they're the team that lands Pirtle. So it was really funny and surprising to see. But when I look at it now, and I said, why are they trading for a center on an expiring contract if they wanted to sell? And
Right.
then I look at the cap sheet and I say, you know what? They didn't have to give up a lot for him. And now it again, we keep talking about this flexibility for these teams that aren't contenders. And I think that's what they're trying to create. Because when you look at this cap sheet and the people who can't see it, what we have here is Siakam is signed for 2 more years. Then you have Van Fleet and Gary Trent Jr. They have 2 player options for next year, right? So they could be done next year. OG was on the block this year, and then it goes down to Boucher and Pirtle, and then Thad Young. He has a non-guaranteed contract which they could pick up next year if they want to, right? So now they bring in Pirtle. He's on an expiring contract, but now they have his salary slot and his bird rights. So now they can re-sign him if they want to. And I think what they can do here is look at essentially play a game of, well, if this happens, then we can do this. If this happens, we can do this, and decide how they want to build their roster up from here based on all of these different options. If OG gets traded in the offseason, depending on if these players pick up their options or if they end up re-signing those guys anyway, or if they want to, re-sign Pirtle in the offseason as well. It's just another option for them. They didn't have to give up a ton to get a solid center. And like you said, on the court, it seems already like it's a good fit for them.
It's a crazy good fit. Last night versus the Magic, he put up a stat line of 30 points on 15 of 17 shooting, 9 rebounds, 2 assists, and 6 blocks. Against
which
the
is
Magic front line.
Surprising because it seemed like his defense wasn't all there as good this year with the Spurs. So it seems like he just might have needed a little bit of energy, a change of scenery, maybe.
Change of scenery, being on a team that's not at the bottom of the league will do wonders for your motivation.
Yeah,
So
right,
I'm sure that was
right,
part of it.
right.
But speaking of the Spurs, I wanted to just quickly highlight their pick situation because it is pretty robust. Just look at what they have to work with. I mean, it's pretty incredible. And you would expect this from a team that's near the bottom of the standings. But this 2023 first I'm highlighting, I think we can all take a guess on what we think that pick might be. That'd be pretty cool if it does come up to be the case. Almost all their first, all the way through. They have a swap here with the Hawks. Another situation with the Celtics, which is interesting because I believe that they received the most favorable of their pick in Boston's 28 first, unless Boston's pick is number one. You don't see that very often. it's very
again. Those are the ones like when I was talking about the 5 second-round picks. How does that negotiation happen? Like,
yeah,
did it start protected lottery or top 5, and then they made it all the way down to top 1, and they just said, look, if we have the first pick, we think it's going to be the next Wembanyama, and so we just want that number 1 for sure. It's just so funny that all the different protections. Anyway, sorry, I digress.
Protections are hilarious. I think just like by nature, it's just funny how it works.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can see here that the Spurs situation, I mean, they have a whole lot of picks from a whole lot of teams for the next 8 years at their disposal. So, I mean, the Spurs can go in a lot of different directions. They did get a 2024 first and then a 2023 and 25 second in this deal. So, I mean, further bolsters their big situation. I mean, it makes sense for them because, I mean, Pirtle, as good as he is, it didn't really make sense to keep him long term. He's not a part of the next generation of Spurs. And you go ahead and dump him. You get yourself a better chance of number 1 pick because I'm sure it's not going to help your win total. And you can even get more picks in the deal. So for them, it just makes sense. And we'll have to keep our eyes on this 23 first. I mean, that's going to be a good one for sure.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I guess I'm surprised there wasn't more of a demand for Pirtle. I thought there might have been a little bit more of a asking price for him. But again, like I said before, there just might not be the teams who are contenders or right there. They just might not have the trade capital or the salary matching to be able to even make that type of deal. So that might be why.
Yeah, that's a good point. It might have just been a limited amount of teams that can feasibly make a deal like that. But
yeah,
who knows? I'd love to be a fly on the wall in negotiations for sure. That would be very interesting. Let's try to get to one more big deal here because this one caused a lot of controversy recently. So this, of course, is the James Wiseman deal that landed him in Detroit, Gary Payton II in Golden State, along with 3 conditional future second-round picks from Atlanta. Sadiq Bey landed in Atlanta, and then the Trailblazers received Kevin Knox, 5 future second-round picks. There's that 5-pick thing again. It's just crazy to think about.
Yeah.
But initially, this trade was in jeopardy because it looked like the Blazers withheld medical information regarding Gary Payton II's injury. It was a core injury. So I watched this. I read up on this a little bit. I think John Hollinger talked about it in The Athletic. But essentially, this is one of the downsides of making a deal like this at the last second on trade deadline day. Because if something like this happens, let's say the player that you want to trade for has some kind of – he fails a physical given by your team. And you go back and you say, I'm not sure if I want to make this deal anymore. You no longer have the ability to modify the deal. You have to go through with it, or you have to initially or pretty much just nix the whole deal. It's just completely canceled. If you made that deal before the deadline, you could probably scrap it and modify it, maybe cut out a team, add another team, change the parameters. But when you do it on the deadline and you find this out after the deadline, you don't have that option to modify it. It's do or die. So I think that's something worth thinking about. All these teams do a deal at the last second. I get it. It gives them more time to work out the best deal. But at the same time, it puts you at risk of things like this happening. So before we got into all the players and their fits, I wanted to highlight that because I do think it's important that teams have the opportunity to do this, but you don't want to handcuff yourself. So if this goes wrong, you have no other option to kind of get out of it.
Right. Yeah, and it'll be funny if this gets brought up at all in CBA negotiations. I don't even know if it would be a negotiation or if it would just be a rule change as far as having a deadline and then like a buffer. But then it brings every team back into it, I guess. So you really can't do that. I mean, it's going to turn into the never ending. Yeah, you have to have a deadline, right? You just have to have a deadline, and that's the deadline. Because if you have the deadline and then it's a failed physical and you can rework the trade, then you can call everybody, right? So that unless maybe it's just a 2-team trade, I don't know. I'm just spitballing it, but yeah, you're absolutely right. The deadlines push deal making, of course. It's almost like, can you have that thought process of doing it a few days ahead of time just so you have that option available if something goes wrong, like it does here. And that I think this happened with the Celtics in the Cavs with Isaiah Thomas, his hip injury. It did happen. They did make the trade in time, and he failed his physical. And all they did was end up, I think, throwing a second round pick to make the deal go through. So they had enough time to do it. But now I believe what's happening instead is that they're asking them to investigate the Portland Trailblazers. And I think instead of reworking it as an actual deal, agreed upon deal, what could happen is some type of punishment instead. But I would imagine that the punishment would be something like a forfeit of a pick rather than a transfer of a pick, something similar to a tampering charge or something like that. But I'm speaking, not without knowledge of how that process would actually go down.
That's what I'm thinking will come about as well, is a forfeit of a second round pick. I can't see it being any more severe than tampering. I don't see how it's any more severe than that. So that's what I expect to possibly happen. I'm not sure. It just kind of depends on what the investigation kind of brings to light. But
and have you heard anything? I haven't heard anything as far as what the actual, what the allegations are, other than just the general withholding medical information. I know that he was being treated for his injury before games that he was actually playing, and I think that was kind of the key part of it. I think that was whether that should have been disclosed, but I don't know the key details in that, and there's probably a reason for that, but.
Yeah, we don't know all the facts. I mean, I did hear that the Blazers were being blamed for playing Peyton, I guess, forcing him to play or something like that, which doesn't make sense to me. Right. I don't know how you force a player to play, but pressuring him to play or something like that, I'm not sure. But yeah, this whole thing is kind of it is a little suspect. I do believe it does seem like the Blazers did do something wrong here that would be worth looking into. But as far as what that is, it's hard to tell. It's just unfortunate for the Warriors because they miss out on that rotation piece for what might end up being the whole rest of the season. It might not happen.
Well, they went through with it. So they still got it.
It comes back to the deadline because they would rather go through with it and not have it for the rest of the season rather than completely just blow up the deal completely. So they basically don't even get a player. I think they were ready to get off of Wiseman. So they wanted to take that opportunity and not lose it and have to wait until the offseason or next trade deadline to do that. I think that's why they did it, but I don't think they did it with a whole lot of joy because they basically
of course. Well, they thought. I mean, they thought they were getting the guy that helped contribute to a ring last year.
Yeah, exactly.
And they could have signed. I suppose they could have signed him in the offseason, but they still got him back. When with all the injuries piling up and how their season's going so far, they're probably going to be pretty happy to have him back to help out down the stretch. And unfortunately, that's not the case. Now, what do you think about Detroit getting Wiseman?
I was about to touch on that here a little bit. Looking at their cap sheet here, I mean, as we know, 2 more years, this season and next season, left in this rookie contract. I'm conflicted on the addition of Wiseman because Bagley had been making strides. He got a new deal. You see it here, 12.5 million for the next 3 years. They already have Jalen Duren, which the other day he just posted a 30-17 game. So, I mean, he's pretty solid already, even in his rookie season. So I think it kind of puts them into a little bit of a jam, because how do you distribute minutes between this guy, Wiseman, and looking down here at Jalen Duren? I just not sure how they kind of do that. It might hamstring the growth of one of those guys, in addition to Bagley, because you can't play Bagley at the 4 exclusively. I think he needs to spend some time at the 5. So, I mean, I guess on paper, I guess I like the deal of Wiseman. It's upside play. Let's go and see what he's got. But at the same time, it's a little murky as far as how do you figure out those minutes? How do you figure out who plays? Oh, and by the way, Isaiah Stewart's still on the roster.
Yeah.
I mean, don't forget about Reese too. So I mean, geez, that's a logjam in my opinion.
I know. But that's what I was thinking too. That's what I was thinking too. I completely agree with you. If it turns into an embarrassment of riches, then great. But like you said, there's only so many minutes to go around to even assess the players, and I think that's the problem. And it's almost unfortunate, because you almost want to see Wiseman get traded. I did. I wanted to see Wiseman get traded to a different non-contender this year, where he would get minutes, and be able to see, go to a team, but go to San Antonio now and see, get those minutes under Pop and see if there's something there. You know what I mean? But I think he went to a non-contender that just has a logjam, and I don't know if he'll be able to make a spot for him there.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate part. I was with you. I wanted to see him traded. I just wanted him to get minutes.
Yeah, right.
He played so little in college, and then he played so little in the league, because between injuries and just ineffectiveness being sent to the G League, he just didn't really have a lot of opportunities.
Sorry, yeah. No, I was just going to say, and then, the Warriors are stacked, and they have no time to let you grow. They're in a win now. They're in win now mode, and they're so deep that when you're not performing, see you later, right? So it's too bad.
No, exactly. And I was just going to say, with Wiseman and his development, it's like, if you think about his growth track and think about where he is in terms of not like years played, but as far as like games and minutes played, he's probably still like a rookie level, if you think about it.
Yeah, right.
Because rookie year, I think he played maybe 40 games, something like that. The second year, I don't think he played at all last year. Very little in college. So between college and the NBA, you're looking at 50 games played.
Yeah.
If you think about it like that, that's just not a whole lot of time at all.
And then how many minutes? How many minutes on top of that too?
Right. Because if he's getting like 18 minutes,
right,
that's not going to do much for him.
Right.
So it's definitely a tough situation. But they do have a lot of talent, and this is without Kate Cunningham out for the season. So once he comes back, you added Wiseman, you added Bagley, who's also been out for a while, Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, a lot of intriguing young guys that can kind of. By the way, I'm surprised Nerlens Noel wasn't traded. I thought Nerlens Noel would be able to move. Quick side, but surprised he's on the roster.
I wonder if he'll be bought out.
Potentially. Because I think there's a few teams out there that can use him and when he brings to the table. Miami. Maybe make a call or two, see what's up. But yeah, I think he could be used a lot more than a place than Detroit, where we just named like 3 centers that all need minutes. And that's without Noel. So it's like I think he needs to move on, honestly. But real quickly here, just looking at those other teams that were involved. I mean, if you go to the Hawks, no one's talking about this, I feel like. The Hawks got a good player here. So you look at the Hawks situation. You added a guy out, Sadiq Bey, who scored 50 points in the game last season. I know it's kind of an anomaly, but he's got potential. You add him into a weak rotation. You're looking at Hunter. You're looking at Bogdanovich. You're looking at AJ Griffin. All these guys. The Hawks are very mid right now. But in terms of, I guess they're better on paper than they are in practice. if that makes sense.
Yeah.
They do have
Yeah.
some good pieces there. It's just not going to come together the way you think it would.
Yeah. And I think that they're having a hard time finding a direction of exactly what they want to do with the team.
Yeah.
And it seems like they're kind of putting band-aids on it now to see if they can get something to work. But you got to let these guys grow with each other. You got to let DeJounte Murray and Trae Young grow with each other and see if they can start building a chemistry, to see if, at least them two, if it can work. And that they had, they should pray that they need to pray that it works after what they gave up for him. But I just think it, like you said, they're so average. They're so in the middle. It's always tough when you're there. You just don't know what direction to take. It's a lot of roster building around the edges, it seems now, and bringing in a guy like Sadiq Bey, great, but is it getting you anywhere? Probably not. I mean, there's not much more you can do at the trade deadline, right? Unless you're blowing it up, but they're not going to do that yet. I think you got to give it another year, see what you can do in the off season, and go from there.
Yeah, that's where I'm at as well. Just looking at what they have to work with. So I mean, if you go on, if you look at the Hawks stats, you look at everything about the Hawks is just mediocre, from their
Yeah.
scoring numbers to margin of victory, their overall record. Everything is like right in the middle, and it's scary, like how right in the middle they are. It's not a place you want to be when you swing a trade for a guy like Murray. You're committing. I mean, you're taking a risk because Murray has one more year after this, and he's unrestricted. So I mean, you're taking a little bit of a risk. You give him a lot of draft capital, and so far the fit between him and Trae hasn't been very seamless. It's been very, very choppy. John Collins is kind of like the odd man out. So yeah, it's just a lot of kind of. It just felt like they made this deal for Sadiq just to make a deal. It didn't seem like, oh, we have this need. He fits exactly what we need. It was more of like Sadiq's available. We don't have to give up much. Let's make a deal. See what he's got.
Right.
Doesn't try to
Right.
make anything real.
It seems like there's just not, like, even when you watch them, it seems like there's not a ton of energy like around the team. There's not, and it might be just the chemistry thing, but they're not a horrible team. And they're
Right.
sitting at 500, but when you look at other teams that sit around 500, I'd rather watch, of course, like obviously the Mavs got Kyrie, but even before that, the Pels have fallen off, but they're still exciting. Obviously the Jazz we just talked about, the Warriors are a whole different story. But even the Thunder, they're more exciting. They seem to play with a lot more energy. So it just seems like, I don't know. It seems like there's not a ton of energy there. And they need to shake it up a little bit in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Like you said, everything just seems average, right down the middle.
It is right down the middle. That's not going to get you anywhere in this league.
Right.
No elite picks, no championship glory, just a lot of riding the treadmill. It's not where you want to be.
Right.
One last note before we close this up here, man. Blazers did get Kevin Knox in this deal, and that's just kind of like a throw-in my opinion. And they also, again, 5 second-round picks. That's what we've been talking about today. But aside from the seconds, I wanted to highlight their first-round situation. I mean, you see all these picks from 23 to 28. They're all protected. And you know what that means? If all your picks are protected, you can't trade any of them, because they're all linked to each other. You can't be without a first in consecutive years. So their hands are tied as far as seconds and the seconds they can trade. So, I mean, I think they really need to look at reducing these protections. It's linked to Chicago. They're all lottery protected. So maybe find a way to adjust that. I think it's in their best interest. Getting seconds is great. But technically, they're still in win now mode with Damian Lillard and Jeremy Grant and Nurkic. So it doesn't really make sense to me for them to gather seconds. It's not really going to do anything for them, except if they want to deal them in a trade for another impact player. But I just want to highlight that because their hands are tied. And they can't really do much with these first-round picks until something with those protections changes.
Yeah, I mean, they can do like a second available, best available. That's the way that they'd be able to do it. But you're right. That's one of the more strange protections that I've seen. I'm not sure why they would stretch it out that far, but with Lillard signing his deal in the offseason and where they stand in the standings right now, after starting pretty hot, they started off pretty well. It's kind of unfortunate to see. I guess they are where everyone thought they would be this season, I suppose, but they're a team that I'd love to see Lillard, get at least deep in the playoffs at some point. He's so loyal to that franchise, and it would be nice to see them be able to build a roster around him. And it seems like they really are trying. They put some good players around him, but they're just not there where they can take that next step yet.
No, not quite. I would like to see that too. He's one of my favorite players.
Mm-hmm.
One day he's going to have a jersey on this wall behind me, in addition to these two great guards that played in our game. But yeah, it's definitely tough for him, and I'm not sure where Portland goes from here. It just seems like unless Lillard moves on somehow, they're going to be stuck between 7 and 10. It just seems like the way it's going to be for them. It's unfortunate because, like you said, they have good players. They just don't quite have enough to stack it with the absolute elites. There in the Western Conference.
And I like the deals that they made in this trade deadline too. It's not getting them. I don't think it's putting them as title contenders, of course, but getting Cam Reddish and Matisse, I think those are good additions. I mean,
they are good additions.
Not having to give up a ton, you get some really good some good solid players on reasonable contracts.
Big time.
And you get their bird rights for next year. So, oh no, they're both restricted free agents, which is good. So, you have them under some control too.
Definitely, I like that for sure. Underrated deals.
Mm-hmm.
But Colin, I think that takes us to the end of our conversation. Eventful trade deadline. I think it's one of the craziest, if not the craziest, trade deadline in history. I don't think it's going to be a long time before we see a top 10 player, arguably top 5 player traded at the deadline. I mean, that's monumental. But in any case, always a great time. Love discussing the abundance of second round picks that flew around this year. And all that good stuff.
Now we got to track all of them just to see who won this trade deadline. In 8 years, who hit with those second round picks.
Absolutely. That's going to be on our to-do list for sure.
Yeah.
But to close it out, guys, if you're looking for all this information, draft capital, our cap sheets, NBA calendar, it's all at notradecalls.com. So be sure to check out our website if you're looking for those resources. We track everything in real time. So as soon as the deal happens, I would say within an hour or so, everything is updated for you guys. So if anything else happens during the season, that's going to be the place you want to go to find all of that information. So thanks everybody for tuning in for another episode. Hope you enjoyed this. Me, Colin, Aaron, we'll be back real soon. We have some other guests coming in that will join us. So we're going to have fun with this, guys. So stick with us as we approach the end of the season and the playoffs here. Not too long from now. So take care, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day here, and then we'll see you on the next podcast.
All right.
Peace out.